Previously on the YouTube channel. You know what's really good? We can both relate to this. Processor made by Qualcomm. Ooh. At least the processors we make are actually getting good Exynos. Maybe it's because I spent a lot of time with the S23 Ultra already and the Pixel 8 Pro is newer. But both of these on a table, I'm gonna pick up the Pixel 8 Pro. All right, so that was 3 months ago. The Pixel 8 Pro, one, it was a better phone, you compare those two. But now that I'm wearing the exact same sweater and we have the newest contender, the S24 Ultra, does it have what it takes to dethrone the Pixel 8 Pro? Because you know when I do my versus, we always pick a winner. I feel like whenever I or anybody does versus, it's become almost a cliche to focus on cameras. So I'm gonna focus on cameras to start this out, because I do think it is a big differentiator between these two phones. Sometimes cliches are cliche for a reason. So, but you flip to the back, clearly just by the sheer size, cameras are very important to the phone. I mean, look at the real estate these cameras are taking up on the back, but they both take different photos. I think it'd be almost a cop-out to be like, well, Samsung's photos are more poppy and what Google's doing are more true to life. That's always been the case with pretty much every generation of Pixel phone, every generation of Samsung phone. But there's way more nuance to it. So let me walk you through kind of everything here. Google seems to be doing what they do best. They take great camera hardware and throw the absolute best software at it. Samsung's giving you a million different cameras and options, but which one is a better direction and which one takes better photos? Now, most of my blind tests, I think are usually pretty close. People have a hard time telling, but I'm gonna imagine as you look at these photos popping up on the screen, you can tell which one is which. But just for the sake of it, give it a look. Leave in the comments down below, let me know what you think A or B was. And if you said A was a Pixel 8 Pro and B was the S24 Ultra, you'd be correct. Because we don't do this nearly often enough. Also, how about a blind test for video? Pick which one is which. It's a lot tougher to decide which is which. And because I'm so clever, it's the same. A was a Pixel, B was a Samsung. Both video look really good. I'll talk more about them in a minute. All right, so clearly both of these are taking really good photos. And I think it comes down how much flexibility you want in the camera. So Samsung's got 4 cameras on the back. There's a main 200 megapixel sensor, which is still insane to even talk about. There's a 12 megapixel ultra wide, 10 megapixel 3x telephoto, and a new 50 megapixel 5x telephoto. The Pixel has 3 cameras, a 50 megapixel main camera, 48 megapixel ultra wide, and 48 megapixel 5x telephoto. And in the history of Pixel phones, they have never come out with the best hardware, yet every picture tends to always be the best. So clearly different takes on the hardware there. The Pixel is giving you a very similar camera sensors for the focal length, while Samsung has a much clearer hierarchy. Let me kind of walk you through here some examples. Here's just an inside shot. We took this picture around 1 p.m. here in California. You can see the white balance is way more accurate on the Pixel. And this is a hard photo to do. We've got the inside light, we have clouds outside, different white balances happening. The Samsung, I think, is skewed a little bit more blue. And if you look at the white balance outside, I think that's where you see the difference. You can actually see the clouds on the Pixel. They appear to be a bit blown out on the Samsung. You would think that there was just full cloud cover instead of actually being able to physically see the clouds that were out there. The things are usually true. Samsung tends to have darker blacks, poppier whites, vibrant colors, and things look a bit more sharpened. I don't usually spend a lot of time in these verses talking about macro, but I did want to show them here. So here's a Rivian logo on my truck, and you can see the highlight reflection on Samsung looks to be blown out. On the Pixel, way less so, probably because it's not sort of pumping out those whites. And if I zoom in, which you probably shouldn't do on a macro shot, but if I did on the water droplet, the Pixel's holding the detail more, I think because of the highlights and the shadows. Samsung though did get the color of the car right. Usually with Samsung photos, they're way brighter. It's more true to actually the green color of the actual truck. And look at all these shots, pretty much all the Pixel shots are warmer. I don't think either the Samsung or the Pixel are true to life, which is kind of weird to say. One is poppier and more bright, one's a little more muted, but neither look how they're actually supposed to. Also, if you have darker skin tone, it is very apparent which one of these is better. This Pixel makes darker skin tone actually look like darker skin tone, whereas on the Samsung it tends to almost skew it a little bit blue. Here's also a comparison with the zooms, and you can see how it handles
as we zoom in on Garfield here. I love having the extra zoom. I use the zoom all the time on my phones. That's why I've tended to gravitate towards Samsung phones. They give you the best zoom here. And having that space zoom to 100 while kind of looking a bit like an oil painting is really nice to have at times. And I think my taste in cameras is changing. And again, totally subjective. Both of these are really top-notch camera systems. But the more photos we took and reviewed them to make this video, the more I found myself gravitating towards what the Pixel was doing on the camera side. I think what pushed me over the edge was actually the portrait shots. I think if I was gonna pick one of these two pictures to use as a profile picture, aside from looking very tired, I think there's a bit more color in my face with what the Pixel is doing. Both of these did an absolutely really impressive job with the cutouts on portrait mode. When I hold my hand up, that is usually really hard. It's like kryptonite for portrait mode. And both did an awesome job doing these cutouts. But having to pick one of these, I think for the first time in a while in these verses, I'm picking the camera system on the Pixel. So before I keep going with the verses, I want to thank this video sponsor, Xsola, talk a little bit about the metaverse in a new book called Once Upon Tomorrow. If you go anywhere on the internet, like the word metaverse is getting thrown around as much as AI nowadays. And it's oftentimes talked about by people who don't understand what it is. That's like mostly why when an expert in the field talks, like I tend to listen. And if the metaverse is going to be as big as advertised, it's going to play a giant role in our futures, and probably selfishly my career, I need to understand what it is now, but I think more importantly, what it's going to be. Now, I don't know if you've ever heard of a company called Xsola, but they are a huge video game commerce company. So their founder, Sherek Agapatu, wrote a book kind of unveiling his vision for the future of the metaverse, and it's called Once Upon Tomorrow. And the book presents a really thorough vision of the metaverse's future with a gigantic emphasis on decentralization, which I love. So it's not owned by any sort of one entity, user-centric experiences, and really innovative revenue models. I think that's the part that piqued my interest as a business owner. The metaverse isn't just about like fun avatars having virtual meetings. It is like way deeper than that. And I think Sherek touched on a bunch of those aspects, from his personal narratives, technical innovations, positioning the metaverse as this like transformative force in the digital landscape. And his expertise, obviously in video games, and he used that as a central theme in the book, kind of helped me understand it better, to highlight how video games sort of spearheaded a ton of technical innovations, things like the invention of new and extremely effective monetization approaches. And I agree with what he was saying. Sherek argues that video game technology and economics are inseparable from the future of the metaverse. And kind of think about the boon of in-game purchases and microtransactions. And there's a ton of really interesting takes in the book. It's not that it's no crazy, hard to understand odyssey either. It's like a 270-ish page, really easy read. If you've got interest in where technology is going, how to best prepare for it, and kind of capitalize on its wave of monetization, and kind of realize that the future is now, I'll click the link in my description and get your copy of Once Upon Tomorrow and learn all about the metaverse's future. So one of the top things the Pixel series has been known for since the very beginning is software. If there's one thing Google has done right, it has been the software. And this is Google's version of Android. It's not stock Android anymore, if that even exists. This is what Google wants a phone to be. And in many ways, that's been a gigantic advantage when it comes to fluidity, features, and ease of use. On the other hand of the spectrum, you have Samsung, who give you tons and tons of features, but typically without the polish that some might have hoped for. With the latest phones, each of them gets sort of best of both worlds. The Pixel gets great features, and Samsung gets great polish, and vice versa. I think Samsung really brought a lot to the table with the S24 Ultra in terms of software, especially with AI. We have things like circle to search, live translate, note assist, generative editing, and photos. All those features are pretty great and work surprisingly well. But you might be tricked into thinking you can only do those things on the S24 Ultra. You can do all of them on the Pixel as well. And these phones, I thought, were the more interesting of kind of any generation. If you look at the history of where Samsung's done with their S line, even the Note line before, they tend to try to pull away from Google. They're trying to do more Tizen-y things. And I think with each generation, from kind of the S22 to here, it was steps back towards Google, culminating in what they have with the S24 line, especially the S24 Ultra. Google's fingerprints are all over this. Now, they might have Samsung branding on top of them, but all these AI features that are amazing on the Samsung are are really Google specific, and sometimes they're even Qualcomm specific when it comes down to the processor. But it seems like Samsung is coming back to embracing the Google-ness of their phones, and now you kind of just have a choice with what appearance you like more or what software set is going to best be suited to your needs. This one was tough. I've tended to always skew towards what Samsung is doing with their software. I like having more options and flexibility in there. The Google side has been a lot cleaner. It's almost been more minimal, which is strange to say. And I know you can do launchers and all that kind of stuff. This is the first category in a while that I don't have a dog in this fight. I could pick either of these based on software and be extremely happy, even though their approaches might be a bit different. I think the Google-ness back in Samsung has made this a total draw, and I don't think software is the determining factor either way anymore. Aside from all the Google-ness, another thing these phones are sharing is 7 years of software support and updates. That is insane. I mean, each of these phones will last way longer than before. Now, I doubt anybody's gonna fall into these phones until 2030 or 2031, but if you wanted to, at least you know they'll be supported, and it's unlikely Google or Samsung's gonna go away anytime soon to support these phones. Hardware-wise, both of these phones are, again, taking similar approaches. So on paper, in the first glance, they are very similar to last year's phones. Not that's always a bad thing, but they are. If you look closely though, you have to see more differences than I think people maybe give them credit for. On the Pixel side, you've got the evolution of the visor. It feels thin, it feels light. Just based on feel of a phone without a case, which you have to be a lunatic to do, which I know some of you are, S24 Ultra with its titanium now feels like a much more premium phone. Inside, both phones are running the latest processors from their respective companies. Samsung is using Samsung-specific Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 by Qualcomm, and Google's using its in-house Tensor G3. I was real tough on Tensor G2. It caused a lot of overheating. I don't think it aged all that well. It appears the G3 has fixed a lot of those problems and is an incredibly powerful processor. Anything I've thrown at it, it can handle with great alacrity, multitasking, no issues at all. I know the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3. I'm not entirely sure what the Samsung version means. It's hard to find information on what's actually specific to Samsung. Again, same things that the Tensor G3 can do right now, but I trust the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 to suit me better 2 or 3 years from now if you're gonna keep your phone that long, let alone keeping it to 7 years, it'll be supported. So if you're gonna keep your phone for just a year or even 2, I don't think it's gonna make a lick of difference which processor you use. If you're gonna keep your phone longer than that, Qualcomm's got a history, and how the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 benchmarks is unbelievable. I would trust it to have headroom for years and years. Regardless of how long you keep these phones, both processors are trying to make sure each phone gets the best battery life. And they're both rocking equal 5,000 mAh batteries, and that leads to generally all-day battery life. And I've stopped talking too much about battery life on these phones because it is the most subjective thing. What third-party apps you're using, how much you're using them. My experience on a phone that goes all day could be half a day with you depending on what you're using. In my experience, it's the only consistent thing I could tell you, I was able to get through full days easily on both of these phones, and that's with a lot of social media, a lot of pictures and video taking, but you shouldn't have to worry at all, at least in how long these phones are gonna last. Other than those hardware features, only a few other differences between them when it comes to hardware side. Obviously, S Pen on the S24 Ultra, some people love it, you know who you are. I use it when I get the phone, and I tend to forget that it's there, but it's something that you get with the S24 Ultra that you are not going to get, obviously, with the Pixel 8 Pro. Other difference here is screen. The Pixel 8 Pro is rocking a 6.7-inch Super Extra display, up to 2400 nits peak brightness, 120 Hz. S24 Ultra, 6.8-inch AMOLED display at 120 Hz and 26 nits of peak brightness. Now, when it comes to screen, and listen, you might hate me for this, there are Samsung displays, and there's everybody else. And it's generally not as close as you think. And usually, if you're not looking at a Samsung display next to any other phone's display, you're gonna be like, this phone is great. Samsung makes displays for every phone manufacturer, almost every phone manufacturer, for a reason. They are absolutely incredible. This is kind of a random thing with the S24 Ultra. This is our third video that we've done on it. And during the first 2 videos, the fingerprint reader worked perfectly. But as we were getting ready to film this versus, it went super wonky and haywire. It was not working very well at all. And I tried to capture it on camera, but much like taking your car in for service and the service light goes off and you bring it in, I couldn't capture it. So I don't know, maybe it was me, maybe it's a ghost in the machine. I'm not in love with the fingerprint reader on the S24 Ultra. I did not have any issues with the Pixel 8 Pro, but again, it might have just been a me thing. So that was a big question, right? We always pick a winner in these verses. We never do like the whatever's best for you. And these phones came out, at least in the phone world, at relatively similar time frames. This one was tough. When it came to the S23 Ultra versus Pixel 8 Pro, pick the Pixel 8 Pro. When it comes to the S24 Ultra versus Pixel 8 Pro, this is really tough. And the urge to say whichever one you pick is gonna be great was very overwhelming, but I'm not gonna do it. I would pick up the S24 Ultra. I think overall is an incredibly well-rounded phone. There are a few caveats, a few exceptions I talked about. I love the way it feels, I love the display, the camera is really good, and I think the extra headroom you get from the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 is enough to push this one over the edge.